When I opened my mailbox last week, I didn't expect to find a letter from my father. Mostly because he's been dead for 3 years. I know how crazy that sounds, but just stay with me for a minute, because what I found inside that envelope turned my entire world upside down. My name is Naomi Keandre. I'm 27, a nurse living in Atlanta. My life has always been pretty quiet, maybe too quiet. After my mom left when I was a kid, it was just me and my dad, Luther. He was everything to me, the one who packed my school lunches, fixed my broken heart, and worked overtime just so I could go to college. He wasn't perfect, but he was my home. Then, 3 years ago, a car accident took him away. Or at least, that's what I was told. When I found that letter in my mailbox, it didn't make sense. It was an ordinary white envelope, slightly crumpled, but the handwriting stopped me cold. I would have recognized it anywhere. That neat, slanted script he used to write on my birthday cards and grocery lists. My hands shook as I turned it over and saw the postmark, Riverside, Louisiana. I didn't know anyone there. I tore it open right there on my porch. Inside was a single piece of paper. No return address, no long message, just one short line written in that same familiar hand. You were right about her. Be careful who you trust. Dad. I read it over and over again, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. My dad? What did he mean? Who was her? And how could he be writing to me if he'd been gone for years? At first, I thought it was a cruel prank. Maybe someone from work, someone who knew my story. But then I remembered something. When I buried my father, they told me his body was so badly burned from the accident that it couldn't be viewed. I never saw him. I just believed what they said. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his handwriting. I remembered the way he used to sign every note with that small dash before his name. The exact same way it was written now. My stomach twisted with a mix of hope and dread. I sat at my kitchen table with the letter under the light, tracing the words with my finger. If it wasn't him, then someone was pretending to be. But why? And if it was him, then what really happened 3 years ago? I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't just ignore it. Whether it was a lie, a warning, or something in between, I needed answers. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and whispered to myself, "Okay, Dad. I'll find out the truth." That's when everything started to unravel. The next morning, I packed a small bag, filled my tank, and drove straight to Riverside, Louisiana, the town stamped on the envelope that changed everything. It was a long 6-hour drive, and the deeper I went south, the quieter the roads became. The trees grew thicker, the radio started cutting out, and all I could think about was that one line from the letter. You were right about her. When I finally reached Riverside, it looked like a place time had forgotten. Most of the buildings were worn down, paint peeling off, signs faded. Even the air felt heavy, like the whole town was keeping secrets. I followed the address printed on the envelope, hoping to find whoever sent the letter. The address led me to what used to be a small post office. The front windows were cracked, and weeds had grown up through the steps. It had clearly been abandoned for years. I stood there for a while, unsure what to do next. Then I noticed a small trailer sitting behind the building, half hidden by trees. It looked like someone might still live there, or at least had once. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. The place was empty, just broken furniture and the smell of damp wood. I found a pile of old mail scattered on the floor, but nothing connected to my dad. Still, the feeling wouldn't leave me. He had to be here at some point. I drove into town and stopped at the only gas station still open. Inside, an older man with a gray beard stood behind the counter, cleaning his glasses. His name tag said Vernon. I bought a bottle of water and, trying to sound casual, asked if he knew anyone named Luther Keandre. At first, he froze. His eyes flicked up, and I could tell he recognized the name. "Haven't heard that one in a long time," he said slowly. My heart started pounding. "So you do know him?" I asked. Vernon sighed and looked toward the window before answering. "Yeah, I knew Luther. He came through here, must have been a few years back. Thought he was dead, though." I gripped the counter. "He is. Or at least, that's what I was told." He studied my face for a long time, then lowered his voice. "He wasn't alone, you know. There was a woman with him. Real quiet, always wearing sunglasses. Name was Celeste. Celeste Ward, I think." The name hit me like a punch to the chest. I didn't know a Celeste, but the way he said it, like it meant something, made my stomach twist. I thanked him, but my voice shook. As I walked back to my car, the truth started to sink in. My father hadn't died. He'd left. And worse, he'd left with someone else. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring out at that dying town, whispering to myself, "Why, Dad? Why did you lie to me?" The next morning, I started asking around about Celeste Ward. Riverside was small, and gossip traveled fast. It didn't take long before someone mentioned a woman named Celeste working at a diner on the highway just outside town. They said she kept to herself and didn't talk much about her past. That was enough for me. I drove straight there. The diner looked like something out of an old movie. Chipped paint, neon lights flickering, and a big sign that read Mabel's Grill. I parked across the street, took a deep breath, and walked in. The smell of coffee and fried food hit me instantly. There were only a few customers, truckers mostly, and behind the counter stood a woman wiping down tables. She was in her mid-40s, with long dark hair tied back and tired eyes that still carried some kind of quiet pride. I knew right away this was her, Celeste. When she turned toward me, her smile faltered for just a second, as if she recognized something in me. I sat at the counter and ordered a coffee, pretending to glance at the menu while really studying her reflection in the metal behind the counter. My heart was pounding. After a few minutes, I said, "Excuse me, do you know a man named Luther Keandre?" Her whole body stiffened. She turned slowly, forcing a polite smile. "Can't say I do," she said too quickly, her voice trembling just a little. It was a lie. I could see it in her eyes. Her hands shook as she picked up a glass, pretending to wipe it clean. That's when I saw it, a gold bracelet on her wrist, engraved with two letters I knew too well, LK. My father had one just like it. He'd given it to my mother years before she left. I stared at it until she noticed. She quickly pulled her sleeve down, trying to hide it. My throat tightened. "That's a beautiful bracelet," I said softly. "Family heirloom?" She muttered something about it being a gift and hurried to the back, pretending to check on an order. I sat there in silence, trying to keep my emotions from boiling over. When the diner closed that night, I parked a little down the road and waited. The place went dark except for the dim kitchen light. I slipped around to the back, my shoes crunching softly on gravel. Behind the dumpster, there was a small box of trash bags, old napkins, and something that caught my eye, a half-torn photograph. I picked it up, my hands shaking. It was my dad, Luther, smiling, standing beside Celeste, her arm around his waist. The photo was dated just 4 months ago. I felt the air leave my lungs. My father hadn't just left, he had chosen to stay gone. He was alive and living a whole other life with her. The truth cut deeper than I could have imagined. Back at the small motel I was staying in, I couldn't sleep. The photo of my father and Celeste burned in my mind like a brand I couldn't erase. I needed proof, something solid to explain how all of this was even possible. So, I pulled out the old box of paperwork I'd brought from home, the one that held every document from when my dad supposedly died. I sat on the floor surrounded by files, the police report, insurance forms, and bank records. It was late, the room quiet except for the hum of the old air conditioner. Then, I saw something I had missed before. On the insurance payout paperwork, there was a second name listed under beneficiary, Celeste Ward. My breath caught. Why would my father's life insurance go to her? The number next to the payout was large, too large. It wasn't just a small benefit. It was enough to start over somewhere new. And that's when it hit me. What if my father's death wasn't an accident at all? What if it was part of a plan? The thought made me feel sick, but I couldn't stop. I called the local branch of the insurance company the next morning, pretending to be handling the final closure of the estate. They gave me just enough information to confirm what I feared. The insurance had been deposited into a joint account. My father's name was on it, and so was hers. That was all I needed to know something dark was going on. But I needed details. So, I drove to the small bank listed on the form, a modest building with peeling paint and a faded logo. Inside, I met with a middle-aged clerk who looked like she'd seen it all. I smiled politely, saying I was trying to make sure there were no open accounts under my late father's name before closing the estate completely. She asked for ID, then went quiet while typing. Her brow furrowed. "Well, ma'am," she said, "it looks like the account is still active." My stomach flipped. I forced a calm voice. "Still active? How's that possible? My father passed away 3 years ago." She hesitated, then lowered her tone. "Someone's been withdrawing small amounts every month. Nothing big, just enough to avoid notice. Last withdrawal was yesterday." My hands went cold. "Do you have a location?" I asked quietly. She nodded and slid a small slip across the desk. Local ATM near Route 7. I thanked her, pretending to stay composed, but my mind was spinning. Yesterday. That meant whoever had access to the account was still here, maybe even watching. Back in my car, I stared at that slip of paper. The truth was no longer just a theory. Someone, maybe my father, was alive and touching that money. I took the letter from my purse, the one that started it all, and traced his handwriting again. It wasn't a ghost. It was real. And so was he. The address from the ATM receipt led me to a small roadside motel on the edge of town. It was the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked. A row of faded doors, buzzing lights, and a parking lot full of potholes. The sign outside read Bayview Inn, though there was no view, just a stretch of cracked highway and fields swallowed by weeds. I parked a few blocks away and waited. Hours passed, then the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the broken asphalt. Every time a car pulled in, my heart jumped, hoping, or maybe fearing, that I'd see him. By midnight, I was starting to think I'd made a mistake. Then I saw him. A man stepped out of room 6, older, thinner, but there was no mistaking him. The curve of his shoulders, the way he rubbed his neck, it was my father. Luther Keandre. Alive. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and every memory of him, every laugh, every lesson, every hug, crashed into me all at once. He looked different now. His beard was gray, his face tired, and his eyes carried the kind of guilt that couldn't be hidden. I didn't even realize I'd gotten out of the car until I was standing in front of his door. He froze when he saw me, the color draining from his face. "Naomi," he whispered, like he was saying a name he never expected to say again. I wanted to run to him. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stood there shaking. "You're supposed to be dead," I said, my voice breaking. He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "I know," he said quietly. "I never meant for it to go this far." "Then why?" I asked, stepping closer. "Why lie to me? Why disappear?" He sighed, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. "Celeste told me you were going to turn me in," he said. "She said you found out about the insurance money, that you'd go to the police. I thought I was protecting you by staying away." I stared at him, disbelief cutting through the ache. "Protecting me? By letting me mourn you for 3 years? By making me bury an empty coffin?" His eyes glistened. "I was scared, Naomi. I didn't know what else to do. I thought if I disappeared, you'd be safe. But he stopped himself, shaking his head. She used me. I see that now." I felt the tears sting my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You let her do this to both of us," I said, my voice cold. He reached for me, but I stepped back. I couldn't stay there any longer. Without another word, I turned and walked out into the night. Behind me, I heard him call my name, but I didn't look back. My heart was breaking, and I couldn't tell which hurt more, that he was alive or that he'd chosen to be gone. After leaving the motel, I drove aimlessly through the empty streets, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. My father's words replayed in my mind, twisting tighter each time. Celeste told him I'd betray him. Celeste convinced him to fake his death. None of it made sense, not yet. But I knew one thing for sure. She was the root of it all. I needed to know who she really was. So I called my aunt back in Atlanta, the only person who still talked about the past without filters. When I asked if she'd ever heard of a woman named Celeste Ward, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then my aunt whispered, "Naomi, Celeste was your mother's cousin." The words hit me like a punch. "What? That can't be right," I said, my voice shaking. "She disappeared years ago," my aunt continued. "Your mother's side never wanted to talk about it. Celeste stole your grandparents' savings and vanished. Your father hated her for what she did. He said she destroyed your mother's trust in everyone." I sat there in stunned silence. The woman who ruined my childhood had come back, and somehow she'd ruined my adulthood too. As the truth sank in, the puzzle pieces started falling into place. Celeste had tricked my father into believing I'd betray him, the same way she'd tricked my grandparents years ago. She'd found a man who was lonely, grieving, and easy to manipulate, and she used him to pull off a perfect fraud. The insurance claim, the staged accident, the fake death, all of it was her design. My father was just another one of her victims. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. That night, I drove back to the diner where she worked. It was late, close to closing time, and the parking lot was almost empty. I tucked my phone into my jacket pocket, hit record, and walked inside. Celeste looked up when I entered, her smile fading instantly. You again, she said flatly. I leaned on the counter. You lied to him, I said. You told my father I was going to turn him in. You made him disappear. Why? She smirked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Because he was stupid enough to believe me. Her tone was cold, careless. You ruined his life, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You ruined mine. She leaned closer, her eyes glinting. Oh, sweetheart, don't play the victim. He was never your hero. He was my payday. I felt the blood drain from my face. She said it with such pride, as if destroying us was a game. I walked out without another word, but my phone was still recording. Her voice echoed in my pocket, clear and sharp. Proof that this time, she wouldn't get away with it. I spent the next 2 days pretending to forgive my father. I told him I understood, that I wanted to help him start over, even though every word felt like glass in my throat. He seemed relieved, desperate to believe me. He kept saying he wanted to make things right, but I'd already decided what that meant for me. I wasn't going to let him or Celeste walk away from what they did. At night, I spread everything out on my motel bed. The letter, the insurance papers, the photo, and the audio recording of Celeste's confession. Each piece of evidence was a piece of the puzzle, and together, they told a story of lies, greed, and betrayal. I took photos of every document and uploaded them to a private cloud, just in case. I knew I couldn't trust anyone but myself. The next morning, I called my father. My voice was calm, steady. Dad, I found something, I said. Another insurance payout. A big one. But it's in both your and Celeste's names. I think you two should come see it. There was a pause on the line. Celeste, he said carefully. Yes, I replied. I already told her. She's willing to meet. I think it's time we clear everything up. He hesitated, but eventually agreed. I could hear the exhaustion in his tone, like a man who'd been running for too long. All right, he said. Where? The motel, I said. Room 6. Tomorrow at noon. That night, I barely slept. I checked my phone every few minutes, replaying Celeste's voice on the recording. He was never your hero. He was my payday. The sound of it made my stomach turn, but it also gave me strength. Tomorrow, she'd say it again, and this time the truth would have witnesses. When morning came, I arrived early. I placed my phone under the table, hidden beneath an old napkin holder, the recorder app already running. I made sure the red light blinked only once before disappearing. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, waiting. Luther arrived first. He looked tired, his clothes wrinkled, eyes red from lack of sleep. Naomi, he said softly, I just want you to know. Before he could finish, the door opened again. Celeste stepped in, wearing the same smug expression I'd seen at the diner. This better be worth my time, she said. I forced a small smile. It will be. They sat down across from each other, the air between them heavy with tension. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I pretended to look through a folder, sliding a few papers across the table. This is everything I found, I said. I think if we work together, we can fix this. Celeste laughed. You think you can fix this? I didn't answer. I just kept the conversation going, letting the recorder do its job. All I needed was for them to talk, to tell the truth out loud. And soon they would. Celeste leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with that same smug smirk that made my blood boil. You know, she said, for someone so smart, you really are naive, Naomi. You think you can just stroll in here and fix what's already done. My father looked down at his hands, silent, his guilt hanging heavy in the air. Celeste turned to him. Go on, Luther. Tell her how it happened. Tell her how easy it was. He shook his head. Don't do this, Celeste. But she was enjoying herself too much. No, let's be honest for once, she said, looking straight at me. You want the truth? Fine. I forged your signature, Naomi. The insurance company needed your approval, since you were the next of kin. So, I signed your name. Perfect cursive, just like your father's. My stomach turned. You forged my name? She grinned, proud of it. Oh, don't look so shocked. You think he could have done this without me? Please. He was a mess when I found him. I just gave him a plan. I glanced at my father. He still wouldn't look at me. Dad, I said quietly, is that true? He finally met my eyes, and the guilt there said everything before he even opened his mouth. I didn't want to believe her, he whispered. But she told me you hated me, Naomi. That you were planning to report me for the old tax issue. She said you wanted me gone. I could barely breathe. You thought I hated you? After everything. He rubbed his face with shaking hands. I was scared. I made the wrong choice. Celeste chuckled darkly. Wrong choice. Oh, please. You made the smart choice. We got the money, didn't we? You just couldn't handle the guilt. That was it. I stepped out from my hiding spot behind the bathroom door, my phone in my hand. You're right, I said, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. You did get the money. And now you're going to give me something even better, a confession. Celeste's eyes went wide as I hit play on my phone. Her voice filled the room, echoing back her own words. I forged your signature, Naomi. He was my payday. She lunged at me in a flash of anger, knocking the phone from my hand. You little snake, she shouted, grabbing at my arm. Before I could react, my father pulled her back. Enough, he yelled, shoving her away. You've done enough damage. She turned on him, furious, and they struggled for a moment before she fell back against the table, sending papers flying. Outside, the faint sound of sirens grew louder, steady, getting closer. I straightened, breathing hard. I called them before I came, I said quietly. I wasn't leaving this time without the truth. Celeste glared at me, realizing too late that her game was over. My father looked at me with tears in his eyes. Naomi. But I just stepped back, letting the sirens fill the silence. The truth was finally louder than their lies. The flashing red and blue lights painted the motel walls as police cars screeched into the parking lot. Celeste's shouting filled the air, but it didn't matter anymore. Her words meant nothing now. 2 officers rushed in, pulling her away from me as she kicked and cursed, still trying to twist her way out of everything. They read her rights, their voices calm against her chaos. Fraud. Assault. Identity theft. The list of her crimes sounded endless, each charge a piece of the pain she'd caused. My father stood frozen, pale and trembling, his hands half raised like he didn't know what to do. One of the officers turned to him. Mr. Keandre, we'll need you to come with us for questioning. He didn't resist. He just nodded, his eyes glassy and far away. As they cuffed him, I felt my stomach drop. Seeing him like that, handcuffed, hollow, a shell of the man I once called my hero, hurt more than I was prepared for. Celeste screamed my name as they dragged her out. You think you've won? You think this fixes anything? Her voice cracked with fury. I didn't answer. I just stood there, watching her disappear into the flashing lights. When the door finally closed and the sirens faded down the road, the silence was deafening. My revenge was done, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like grief all over again. The next day, the police called me in to sign a few documents and give my final statement. They told me Celeste was facing multiple charges and that Luther would be charged too. Conspiracy to commit fraud, aiding in false documentation. I nodded numbly, barely hearing them. Later that week, I visited him. The county jail was cold and gray, the kind of place that sucked the color out of everything. When I walked into the visiting room, he was already there, sitting behind the glass, his hands trembling slightly as he lifted the phone. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. His eyes were red, his face worn down by guilt and sleepless nights. Finally, he said, Naomi, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know that I thought I was protecting you. I didn't want you to get hurt. I didn't mean for any of this. I stared at him through the glass, feeling the weight of every lie, every silent year, every time I'd cried over a grave that didn't hold him. My voice came out soft, almost a whisper. You had 3 years to write me a letter, Dad. And when you finally did, it was too late. He broke then, covering his face as the tears came. I watched him cry, but I didn't cry with him. The part of me that used to need his love was gone. When I left that room, I didn't look back. Revenge wasn't sweet. It was quiet, and it left me empty. Back in my small apartment in Atlanta, everything felt strangely still. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and the faint hum of traffic outside my window. On my kitchen table sat the one thing that started it all, the letter. It was worn now, creased and smudged from being read too many times. I had almost thrown it away once, but something inside me couldn't let go. That night, I turned on the small desk lamp and picked up the letter again. My father's handwriting stared back at me, shaky but familiar. You were right about her. Be careful who you trust. Dad, I'd read those words 100 times, but this time, I noticed something different. Under the glare of the light, there were faint grooves beneath the ink, like another message written hard enough to leave marks but not inked through. My breath caught. I grabbed a pencil and gently shaded over the paper, watching the hidden words rise from the blank space like ghosts coming to life. Don't trust Celeste. Don't trust me either. I froze, my hand trembling. It wasn't just a warning, it was a confession. He knew. He'd known the truth about himself, about her, about everything. Maybe the letter wasn't meant to save me from Celeste. Maybe it was meant to help me see him for who he really was, flawed, weak, human. Tears welled up, but I didn't let them fall. For years, I'd built my life around grief and anger, around missing a man who wasn't really gone. Now there was no illusion left. The man I'd loved had died long before his fake accident. The one who'd written this letter, he was just trying, in his own broken way, to give me the truth. I sat for a long time, just staring at the paper, the soft pencil lines smudged by my fingertips. Then I reached for a new sheet, the same kind of line stationery my father used. My hand didn't shake this time as I began to write. Dear Dad, you taught me what betrayal feels like. You showed me how deep it cuts and how heavy it sits in the heart. But you also taught me something else, what strength looks like. Not yours, but mine. I've survived every lie, every loss, every truth you were too afraid to face. And somehow I'm still standing. Naomi. I sealed the envelope, writing the prison's address in careful handwriting. When I dropped it into the mailbox the next morning, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Walking home, I felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because I'd finally stopped carrying it. My father's story was over, but mine was just beginning. As the sun broke through the clouds, I whispered to myself, I'm free. Do you think Naomi made the right choice by walking away and finding her own peace? Or should she have given her father another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really love to hear them. And if you enjoy emotional stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.